The guard leaned out of his booth, clipboard in hand, and looked past Colonel Evelyn Thorne like she was already dismissed. "Ma'am, I think you've got the wrong gate. Civilian access is 2 miles back down the highway." He gestured vaguely behind her without meeting her eyes, already turning back toward his computer screen. She remained still, hands resting on the steering wheel of her sedan, and kept her voice level. "I'm at the correct gate, Corporal. I have orders to report to headquarters this morning." The second guard emerged from the booth, younger than the first, his expression already showing the patient condescension of someone prepared to redirect a lost driver. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner, the kind of look that said this happens all the time. "Ma'am, this is the main command entrance. If you're looking for the visitor center or maybe family services, I can give you directions." Thorne reached for the folder on her passenger seat, her movements deliberate and unhurried despite the line of vehicles forming behind her. "I'm not looking for visitor services. I'm reporting for duty." She extended the folder through her window. The first guard took it without enthusiasm, flipping it open with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had processed hundreds of mistaken arrivals. His eyes scanned the first page, then stopped. He read it again, his brow furrowing, and looked up at her with a new expression that mixed confusion with disbelief. "This says you're the incoming base commander." "That's correct." The second guard moved closer, reading over his partner's shoulder. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He shook his head slowly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, there must be some kind of error here. The new commander is a full colonel, senior officer, combat veteran with multiple deployments." "I am a full colonel," she replied, her tone unchanged. 22 years of service, 3 combat deployments, decorated twice for valor in theater operations. The first guard flipped through several more pages, his skepticism visible in the set of his jaw and the way he kept glancing between the documents in her face. He looked at his partner again, this time with something approaching concern. "I'm going to need to call this in." He stepped back toward the booth, taking the folder with him. "Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed situations where first impressions were completely wrong." Thorne waited, engine idling, while the corporal spoke into his radio in tones too low to hear clearly. Behind her, a military transport truck sat patiently, its driver making no move to honk or show impatience. The second guard remained near her window, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his earlier condescension replaced by visible uncertainty. The first guard returned, folder still in hand, his expression now carefully neutral. "Ma'am, my supervisor is on his way down. If you could just pull over there to the side, we'll get this sorted out right away." "How long will that take?" she asked, checking her watch with obvious purpose. "I'm expected at headquarters at 0800. "Just a few minutes," he assured her, but his voice carried the tone of someone who didn't actually know. Protocol for situations like this requires additional verification. She pulled her sedan to the designated waiting area, a small paved section just beyond the gate booth where vehicles sat in clear view of the checkpoint. Through her rear-view mirror, she watched the guards process the next 3 vehicles without incident, waving them through with casual efficiency. One of the guards kept glancing toward her car, then turning to say something to his partner that made them both shake their heads. 15 minutes passed. The morning sun climbed higher, heating the interior of her car despite the autumn temperature outside. Thorne sat without visible impatience, her posture relaxed but alert, hands folded in her lap. She had spent enough years in uniform to recognize bureaucratic resistance when she encountered it. A Humvee approached from inside the base, moving at deliberate speed through the gate complex. It pulled up beside her sedan, and a staff sergeant emerged, a man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who had seen enough unusual situations to approach them with caution rather than assumption. He carried her folder and wore an expression of professional assessment. "Colonel Thorne," he said, his use of her rank a marked change from the guard's careful avoidance of it. "I'm Staff Sergeant Reeves, gate supervisor. I apologize for the delay." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "We weren't expecting the incoming commander to arrive through the main gate without escort or advance notice." "I prefer to arrive without fanfare," she replied, meeting his eyes directly. "Is there a problem with my credentials, Sergeant?" "No, ma'am. Everything appears to be in order." He glanced back toward the gate booth, where both guards watched their exchange with obvious interest. "It's just unusual protocol. Most senior officers arriving for command transitions are met at the airfield or escorted from their previous posting. I drove myself from Fort Bragg," she said simply. "Is that going to be an issue?" "No, ma'am," he repeated, but his hesitation suggested it was still unusual enough to merit caution. "If you'll follow me, I'll escort you to headquarters. Save you any additional delays at security checkpoints." She started her engine and followed the Humvee through the main gate, finally passing the checkpoint where she had been stopped for nearly 20 minutes. In her peripheral vision, she saw both original guards standing outside their booth, watching her vehicle pass with expressions that hadn't quite settled into any single emotion. Confusion competed with embarrassment, both overlaid with the dawning recognition that they had just made their incoming commander wait by the roadside like a lost civilian. The base spread out before her, buildings and facilities arranged with military precision across several square miles of secured territory. She had studied maps and satellite imagery for weeks, memorizing layouts and strategic positions, preparing for this command with the same thoroughness she brought to every assignment. Knowing the base on paper was one thing. Arriving to find her authority questioned before she even passed the front gate was another. The headquarters building rose 3 stories against the morning sky, its facade maintained with the precise attention to detail that marked every structure on a well-run military installation. Staff Sergeant Reeves pulled the Humvee into a space marked for official vehicles and stepped out, waiting for Thorne to park beside him. His earlier caution had settled into something more deliberate, a careful neutrality that suggested he was still uncertain how to categorize the situation. As they approached the entrance, a captain emerged from the building, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone responding to an urgent summons. He was young, perhaps 30, with the clean-cut appearance and confident stride of an officer who had never seriously questioned his place in the military hierarchy. He looked at Reeves first, then at Thorne, his gaze passing over her with polite but obvious dismissal. "Sergeant, what's the situation?" he asked, directing his attention entirely to Reeves as though Thorne were simply part of the scenery. "Sir, this is Colonel Thorne," Reeves began, his voice carefully formal. "She's reporting for duty as the incoming base commander." The captain's expression shifted through several stages in rapid succession. Confusion appeared first, followed by skepticism, then landing on something that resembled patient tolerance for what he clearly believed was an administrative error. He turned to face Thorne directly for the first time, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the quick assessment that dismissed her as a threat to his understanding of proper military order. "Ma'am, I'm Captain Vance, assistant to the current base commander." He paused, choosing his words with visible care. "I think there may be some confusion here. Colonel Morrison is expecting his replacement this morning, but the personnel we're expecting is a senior colonel with extensive combat command experience." "I am that personnel, Captain," Thorne replied, her tone neither defensive nor aggressive, simply stating fact. "My orders are quite clear." Vance glanced at Reeves, who handed him the folder without comment. The captain opened it, his eyes scanning the documents with the same skeptical attention the gate guards had shown. He read more thoroughly than they had, taking time with each page, and she watched his confidence waver slightly as he processed information that didn't align with his expectations. "These orders appear legitimate," he said slowly, the qualifier in his phrasing unmistakable. "But I'm sure you can understand our caution. We weren't notified of any changes to the expected arrival profile." He looked up from the folder, meeting her eyes directly. "The incoming commander we were briefed about is male." "Did your briefing materials specify gender?" she asked, keeping her voice level. He hesitated, clearly uncertain whether they had, or if he had simply assumed. "Well, no, not explicitly, but Colonel Morrison mentioned that his replacement was someone he served with in the Gulf War, and we naturally assumed based on the demographics of that era's senior officer corps. Assumptions can be problematic, Captain," she observed. "I did serve in the Gulf War." I also serve in Bosnia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. My record is available for your review if you need verification beyond the official orders I presented. Vance closed the folder slowly, his expression settling into professional concern masking deeper uncertainty. Ma'am, please don't misunderstand. We run a tight security protocol here. Any unexpected arrival, regardless of claimed rank or credentials, requires verification. I'm sure you'd expect nothing less from your command staff. I expect competence and attention to detail, she replied. What I'm currently observing is skepticism based on factors that shouldn't influence professional military assessment. A flicker of something crossed his face, defensiveness perhaps, or recognition that she had identified the real source of his hesitation. He straightened slightly, reasserting his authority in the situation. If you'll come inside, I'll contact Colonel Morrison's office and clarify the situation. I'm sure we can resolve this quickly. They entered the building, passing through security where Thorne submitted to the same identification verification required of any visitor, despite having already presented her orders to multiple personnel. The guards at the interior checkpoint examined her credentials with the same doubtful attention she had encountered at the gate, looking from her face to her military identification card with expressions that suggested they were searching for evidence of fraud. Captain Vance led her through corridors that smelled of floor wax and discipline, past offices where personnel glanced up from their work to watch their progress with open curiosity. Word had clearly spread through the building that something unusual was occurring. Junior officers and enlisted personnel appeared in doorways, their gazes following Thorne with undisguised interest. She heard whispered conversations start as soon as she passed, voices kept deliberately low, but not quite quiet enough to be inaudible. "Who is she?" someone asked. "No idea." Vance pulled her out of a car at the gate. "Thinks she's the new commander." Laughter, quickly suppressed but unmistakable, followed that comment. She walked on without reaction, her pace steady and her bearing unchanged. She had endured worse than whispered doubts in her 22 years of service. This was merely another variation on a familiar theme. Vance stopped at a reception area outside a suite of offices marked with the insignia of base command. A sergeant sat behind a desk, her workspace organized with military precision, every item aligned and purposeful. She looked up as they approached, her professional smile fading slightly when she saw Thorne. "Sergeant Kemp, this is Colonel Thorne," Vance said, and the sergeant's eyebrows rose fractionally. "She claims to be the incoming base commander. I need you to contact Colonel Morrison's office immediately and verify her expected arrival." "Claims to be," Thorne noted quietly. "That's the third time you've used that particular phrasing, Captain." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "Ma'am, it's simply procedural language. Until we have confirmation from Colonel Morrison's office, I have to treat this as an unverified claim of identity." Sergeant Kemp picked up her phone, her eyes still on Thorne with barely concealed curiosity. "Colonel Morrison's office, please." "Yes, this is Sergeant Kemp at headquarters reception. We have a situation here that requires immediate clarification." She paused, listening. "There's a woman here claiming to be Colonel Thorne, the incoming base commander. Can you verify if that's the expected arrival profile?" The words hung in the air. Woman claiming to be. Thorne remained standing, hands clasped loosely behind her back, her expression neutral while she waited for someone in a position of authority to confirm what her official orders had already stated clearly. Around her, the building seemed to hold its breath, personnel in nearby offices abandoning any pretense of working while they watched the unfolding situation. Sergeant Kemp's expression changed as she listened to the response on the phone. Her professional courtesy transformed into something approaching alarm. She glanced at Vance, then at Thorne, then back at the phone. "Yes, sir, I understand. Right away, sir." She placed the phone down carefully, her movements suddenly precise with tension. "Captain Vance, Colonel Morrison is coming down personally. He'll be here in 2 minutes." The captain's face paled slightly. "He's coming here," he repeated, as though hoping he had misheard. "Yes, sir." He sounded very interested in meeting Colonel Thorne immediately. The 2 minutes stretched into something that felt considerably longer. Thorne remained standing in the reception area, aware of the growing number of personnel finding reasons to pass through the corridor or linger near doorways. Captain Vance shifted his weight repeatedly, his earlier confidence replaced by visible anxiety. Sergeant Kemp busied herself with paperwork that clearly didn't require her attention, stealing glances at Thorne every few seconds. A major appeared from one of the adjacent offices, drawn by the unusual activity. He stopped when he saw the assembled group, his gaze settling on Thorne with immediate curiosity. "What's going on?" he asked Vance, keeping his voice low but not quite achieving privacy. "Potential situation," Vance replied quietly. Woman showed up claiming to be Colonel Thorne. "The new commander," the major said, his tone carrying clear disbelief. He looked at Thorne again, this time with obvious assessment. His expression cycled through the same progression she had seen on every face that morning. Confusion, skepticism, and the careful neutrality of someone trying not to make assumptions while clearly making them anyway. "Has anyone verified her identity?" "Colonel Morrison is coming down personally," Vance said, and something in his voice suggested he viewed this as evidence of how seriously the situation was being taken, as though the outgoing commander's personal attention proved they were right to doubt her. The major nodded slowly, crossing his arms across his chest. He positioned himself near the reception desk, another observer to the unfolding verification process. "Ma'am," he said finally, addressing Thorne directly. "I'm Major Hendricks, Base Operations Officer. If you are who you claim to be, you'll understand our caution. We can't simply take someone's word when they show up unannounced claiming senior command authority." "I announced my arrival through proper channels," Thorne replied calmly. "I submitted my orders at the gate, presented them to Staff Sergeant Reeves, and provided them again to Captain Vance. At what point does proper military documentation become insufficient?" Hendricks exchanged a glance with Vance. "Documentation can be forged," he said. "We've had instances of civilians attempting to access secure facilities using fake credentials. It's rare, but it happens. And do those civilians typically have comprehensive knowledge of military protocol and demonstrate 22 years of service bearing?" she asked, her tone remaining level despite the implication. Before Hendricks could respond, footsteps echoed in the corridor, distinctive in their purposeful cadence. Every person in the reception area turned toward the sound. Colonel Morrison appeared, a man in his late 50s with silver threading through close-cropped hair and the weathered features of someone who had spent decades in military service. His uniform was immaculate, ribbons displayed in perfect alignment, and he moved with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. He saw Thorne and stopped, his expression shifting instantly from official concern to something approaching relief, mixed with embarrassment. "Evelyn," he said, and the single word transformed the atmosphere in the room like a switched current. He moved forward, extending his hand. "I apologize for this reception. I had no idea you'd arrived." Thorne shook his hand, her grip firm and her expression finally showing a hint of dry amusement. "Hello, David. It's been an interesting morning." Morrison turned to face the assembled personnel, his expression hardening. "Captain Vance, Major Hendricks, Sergeant Kemp, I want to know exactly how my replacement, a distinguished colonel with orders clearly stating her arrival date and purpose, ended up standing in my reception area being treated like a security threat." "Sir," Vance began, his face flushing, "we were simply following protocol for unexpected arrivals." Her credentials seemed unusual for the expected command profile. "Unusual how?" Morrison asked, his voice dropping to a tone that every military member recognized as preceding serious consequences. "We weren't expecting a female officer, sir," Hendricks said quietly, apparently deciding that honesty was the only viable path forward. Morrison's jaw tightened visibly. "Colonel Thorne served under my command in Desert Storm. She was a lieutenant then, one of the finest tactical officers I ever had the privilege of leading. She went on to distinguish herself in every subsequent conflict, earned 2 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, and commanded battalion operations in Fallujah that are still taught at the War College." He paused, letting his words settle. And you detained her at the gate because her gender didn't match your assumptions. The silence that followed was absolute. Vance stared at the floor. Hendricks uncrossed his arms slowly, his earlier defensive posture collapsing. Sergeant Kemp had stopped even pretending to work, her eyes wide with the recognition of how badly this situation had developed. Morrison turned back to Thorne, his expression softening. I sent notification of your arrival to everyone on the command staff. Full details, complete service record, expected arrival window. Apparently my staff needs remedial training in reading comprehension. They read what they expected to read, Thorne said, and her tone carried no accusation, simply observation. It's a common cognitive bias. People see what they anticipate rather than what's actually present. That's generous of you, Morrison replied. I'm significantly less charitable about it. He glanced at his watch. The change of command ceremony is scheduled for 1400 hours. Between now and then, I expect every member of my staff to familiarize themselves thoroughly with Colonel Thorne's record. He looked directly at Vance and Hendricks. And I mean thoroughly. Read every commendation, every operation report, every fitness evaluation. You're about to serve under one of the most capable commanders in the United States military, and your first interaction with her was to question her legitimacy. Yes, sir, they responded in unison, both voices subdued. Morrison gestured toward the corridor leading deeper into the command suite. Evelyn, if you'll come with me, I'll show you your office, and we can go over the transition briefing materials. We have about 5 hours before the official ceremony, which should give us enough time to cover the critical operational details. Thorne followed him down the corridor, aware of the eyes tracking her movement. Behind her, she heard the immediate eruption of whispered conversations, the kind of urgent discussions that followed any significant event. Word would spread through the base within the hour. The incoming commander had arrived, been detained and questioned, and turned out to be exactly who she claimed to be. The story would grow with each retelling, details added and embellished, but the core truth would remain unchanged. Morrison opened a door marked with temporary signage indicating incoming commander, and they entered an office that was clearly in transition between occupants. Some personal items remained from Morrison's tenure, but spaces had been cleared for new ownership. The desk was clean, ready for someone else's command style and organizational preferences. I really am sorry about this morning, Morrison said once they were alone. I trained this staff better than what you experienced. They're cautious, Thorne replied. That's not necessarily a bad quality in military personnel. Just needs to be balanced with the ability to process information that challenges their expectations. Still, he said, shaking his head, you deserve better than to be treated like an imposter at your own change of command. Morrison spread a series of maps and operational reports across the desk, his movements efficient and practiced. The office windows overlooked the base's central parade ground, where personnel moved through their morning routines with mechanical precision. Thorne positioned herself where she could see both the documents and the view, her attention shifting between Morrison's briefing and the base she would soon command. The facility supports 3,000 personnel, Morrison began, his finger tracing primary structures on the map. 2 infantry battalions, 1 armor unit, combat support services, and a small special operations detachment that operates with significant autonomy. He glanced up at her. The Special Operations Group will be your most interesting challenge. They're accustomed to minimal oversight. I've worked with special operations before, she replied. They respect competence and direct communication. Everything else is secondary. Good, because their commander is a lieutenant colonel who doesn't appreciate administrative interference. He paused, selecting his words carefully. He's also someone who tends to make assumptions based on traditional command structures. You mean he's going to have the same response your staff had this morning? Thorne said without rancor. Morrison smiled grimly. Probably worse. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett has spent his entire career in combat units. He's technically brilliant, but socially prehistoric. I've already had 3 conversations with him about your arrival, and he's made his skepticism abundantly clear. Did you tell him my background? I did. Complete service record, combat decorations, tactical achievements. He listened politely and then asked if I thought a theoretical commander could handle actual operators in the field. Morrison shook his head. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're walking into, not because I think you can't handle it. Noted Thorne said. Well, should I know about command dynamics here? They spent the next 2 hours reviewing operational details, personnel assessments, and ongoing mission priorities. Morrison was thorough, his briefing covering everything from supply chain logistics to diplomatic relationships with local civilian authorities. He highlighted problem areas with the frankness of someone who knew his replacement was capable of handling difficult truths. A knock interrupted them mid-afternoon. Morrison called for entry, and Captain Vance appeared in the doorway, his posture rigidly correct and his expression carefully neutral. Sir, the command staff is assembling for the pre-ceremony briefing. He hesitated, then added, they're all present and ready for Colonel Thorne's introduction. Good, Morrison said. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Vance left, and Morrison turned to Thorne with an expression that mixed amusement and concern. This is going to be interesting. I gather that by now, everyone on base has heard some version of this morning's events. The staff meeting will be your first opportunity to address them as their incoming commander. They walked through corridors that felt different from the morning's journey. Personnel they passed now knew who she was, and their reactions ranged from curious to respectful to carefully blank. Junior officers stepped aside with proper deference, and senior NCOs acknowledged her with professional courtesy that had been absent earlier. Word had indeed spread, transforming her from questionable arrival to recognized authority. The conference room held 12 officers seated around a polished table, with additional personnel standing along the walls. Every head turned when Morrison entered with Thorne, and she read the room's emotional temperature in an instant. Embarrassment competed with curiosity, both overlaid with the careful attention of professionals determined not to repeat earlier mistakes. Morrison moved to the head of the table. Gentlemen and ladies, I want to formally introduce Colonel Evelyn Thorne, who will assume command of this base at 1400 hours today. Some of you had the opportunity to meet her this morning under less than ideal circumstances. He let that statement hang for a moment. Colonel Thorne has graciously chosen to view those circumstances as an opportunity for learning rather than grounds for immediate disciplinary action. Several officers shifted uncomfortably. Major Hendricks, seated near the middle of the table, kept his eyes fixed on the surface in front of him. Morrison continued, his tone growing more serious. Colonel Thorne served under my command in Desert Storm, where she demonstrated tactical brilliance that saved American lives and accomplished mission objectives other units considered impossible. She has since commanded at every level from company to battalion, served in every major conflict of the past 2 decades, and earned recognition for valor under fire that most of you will never experience. He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. She's also one of the most demanding commanders you will ever serve under, and I say that with complete respect. She expects excellence, accepts nothing less, and leads by example in ways that make excuses obsolete. Thorne watched the faces around the table process this information. Several officers appeared genuinely impressed, their earlier skepticism giving way to professional interest. Others remained guarded, their expressions suggesting they were reserving judgment regardless of Morrison's endorsement. A lieutenant colonel near the far end of the table leaned back in a chair, his posture radiating skepticism despite Morrison's introduction. This had to be Garrett, the Special Operations Commander Morrison had warned her about. His arms were crossed, his expression neutral in a way that suggested active disapproval masked behind professional courtesy. Morrison gestured toward Thorne. Colonel, would you like to address your incoming command staff? She stepped forward, positioning herself where everyone could see her clearly without having to shift their attention. Her voice carried across the room with the projection of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I'm aware that my arrival created unexpected complications this morning. That wasn't my intention, but it happened nonetheless. She paused, meeting several sets of eyes directly. I could spend time discussing assumptions and biases and missed opportunities for better communication. Instead, I'm going to focus on what matters going forward. The room remained silent, every officer's attention fixed on her. I expect 3 things from everyone serving under my command, she continued. First, competence in your assigned duties at a level that exceeds minimum acceptable standards. Second, honest communication about operational realities, even when those realities are uncomfortable or inconvenient. Third, the ability to adapt when circumstances challenge your expectations. She let those words settle. This morning challenged your expectations. How you respond to that challenge will determine our working relationship. Garrett uncrossed his arms slightly, his expression shifting to something approaching interest despite his apparent determination to remain skeptical. I've read every personnel file in this room, Thorne said. I know your backgrounds, your specialties, your strengths, and your development areas. I didn't form those assessments based on demographics or assumptions. I read your actual performance records. She moved along the side of the table, her gaze encompassing the entire group. I expect this same professional approach from you. Judge me on my command decisions, my operational competence, and my ability to accomplish this base's mission. Everything else is irrelevant noise. A major near the center of the table, someone Thorne hadn't met during the morning's chaos, raised his hand slightly. Ma'am, with respect, this morning's situation resulted from inadequate advance information about your arrival profile. How do we prevent similar miscommunications in the future? You prevent them by reading the information you're actually provided instead of filling gaps with assumptions, she replied without hesitation. Captain Vance, what did the arrival notification from Colonel Morrison specify about the incoming commander? Vance, seated near Morrison, straightened in his chair. Name, rank, arrival date and time, and a complete service record summary, ma'am. Did it specify gender? No, ma'am. Did it need to? She asked, looking back at the major who had raised the question. The major had the grace to look uncomfortable. No, ma'am. It shouldn't have mattered. Correct, Thorne said. It shouldn't have mattered, and yet it clearly did. That's the learning opportunity one mentioned. Not a reason for punishment, but absolutely a reason for professional reflection and adjusted behavior. The meeting continued with operational briefings from each department head. Supply and logistics reported readiness levels. Intelligence summarized regional threat assessments, and training command outlined upcoming qualification cycles. Thorne listened without interruption, absorbing information with a focused attention that had characterized her approach to every command she had assumed. She asked precise questions that revealed her understanding of military operations at a level that visibly impressed some officers, while making others reassess their earlier judgments. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett waited until his turn arrived, then stood with the deliberate movements of someone making a point through body language. Ma'am, Special Operations maintains autonomous operational authority under existing protocols. We coordinate with Base Command on logistics and support requirements, but tactical decisions remain within our chain of command. He paused, his tone suggesting this was a statement of non-negotiable boundaries rather than simple information sharing. I'm familiar with Special Operations protocols, Thorne replied evenly. I worked joint operations with SEAL teams, Delta Force, and Army Rangers in 3 different theaters. What specific concerns do you have about command coordination? Garrett's expression flickered with surprise before settling back into professional neutrality. No specific concerns at this time, ma'am. Just establishing operational parameters. Establishing boundaries, you mean, she said, and several officers around the table shifted uncomfortably at her directness. You're wondering if I'm going to interfere with your mission planning or second-guess your tactical decisions. The room held its breath. Garrett's jaw tightened slightly, but he maintained his composure. That's a reasonable interpretation of my statement, ma'am. Here's my approach to Special Operations coordination, Thorne said, her voice carrying the weight of experience rather than theoretical policy. I don't interfere with tactical expertise in areas where operators know their business better than I do. I do expect complete transparency about mission parameters, risk assessments, and resource requirements. I also expect immediate notification of any operational complications that could affect base security or regional stability. She met Garrett's eyes directly. What I will not tolerate is operators who confuse autonomy with independence, or who treat coordination as optional rather than mandatory. Garrett nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested grudging respect despite his determination to remain skeptical. Understood, ma'am. My teams operate within proper channels. Good, because I've read your unit's after-action reports for the past 18 months. She saw his surprise at that detail. You run effective operations with acceptable casualty rates and strong mission completion statistics. You also have a pattern of requesting forgiveness rather than permission when timelines get compressed. That approach has worked under Colonel Morrison's command style. It won't work under mine. The silence that followed carried a different quality than earlier pauses. This was an uncomfortable recognition of bias. This was professional assessment being delivered by someone who had clearly done her homework and wasn't interested in posturing or establishing dominance through unnecessary confrontation. She was simply stating operational expectations based on documented patterns. Ma'am, Garrett said carefully, compressed timelines are inherent to special operations work. Opportunities close quickly in the field. I'm aware of that reality, Thorne replied, which is why I maintain direct communication availability 24 hours a day during active operations. You'll have my personal contact information, and you'll use it when situations require immediate command decisions. What you won't do is make unilateral choices that affect base security and then brief me after the fact. Morrison watched this exchange with visible satisfaction, and Thorne recognized that he had probably dealt with similar friction during his own tenure. The relationship between base command and special operations was perpetually complicated by competing needs for oversight and flexibility. Finding the balance required commanders who understood both perspectives. The briefings concluded an hour before the change of command ceremony. Morrison dismissed the staff, and officers filed out with expressions ranging from thoughtful to concerned. Several lingered near the door, clearly wanting to speak with Thorne but uncertain whether to approach. She made the decision easier by remaining at the conference table, reviewing notes, and appearing accessible despite her focus on the documents. Major Hendricks approached first, his earlier confidence replaced by something more tentative. Ma'am, if I could have a moment. She looked up, her expression neutral. Major, I wanted to apologize personally for this morning, he said, the words coming with visible difficulty. I made assumptions based on inadequate information and personal bias. That's unprofessional, and it won't happen again. What will you do differently? She asked, and the question clearly wasn't rhetorical. He paused, considering his answer with the care it deserved. I'll verify information against actual documentation rather than against my expectations. I'll recognize when my assumptions are influencing my assessment. And I'll remember that competence and command authority aren't defined by demographics. Good answer, Thorne said. I'm not interested in extended apologies or self-flagellation. I'm interested in adjusted behavior going forward. Can you provide that? Yes, ma'am. Then we're fine, Major. Your operational briefing was solid, and your threat assessment showed careful analysis. That's what I need from my operations officer. Relief crossed his features, followed by determination. Thank you, ma'am. You'll have my full support. Captain Vance waited until Hendricks left before approaching, his posture even more rigid than before. Ma'am, I also need to apologize for my conduct this morning. I failed to give proper weight to your credentials and allowed assumptions to override professional judgment. Thorne studied him for a moment, reading the genuine discomfort in his bearing. Captain, you're young enough that this morning's mistake might actually prove valuable if you learn from it properly. What matters isn't that you made an error in judgment. What matters is how you respond when confronted with information that challenges your worldview. I understand, ma'am, he said quietly. Do you? She asked, her tone sharpening slightly. Because I'm not convinced you've processed the actual lesson here. This isn't about political correctness or avoiding bias for its own sake. This is about operational effectiveness. When you let assumptions override evidence, you compromise your ability to assess situations accurately. In combat, that weakness gets people killed. The words landed with visible impact. Vance's face paled slightly, and his posture stiffened even more. You're right, ma'am. I was thinking about this as a social issue rather than an operational one. Everything is operational when you're wearing this uniform, Thorne said. Your assumptions this morning didn't just create an awkward situation. They demonstrated a cognitive vulnerability that would make you a liability in any high-stakes environment. She softened her tone slightly. You're a capable officer, Captain. Colonel Morrison wouldn't have you on his staff otherwise. But you need to develop the ability to recognize when your brain is filling gaps with comfortable assumptions instead of demanding actual evidence. Yes, ma'am, he replied, and this time his voice carried genuine understanding rather than reflexive agreement. I'll work on that. See that you do, because I'm going to test it. She gathered her documents, preparing to leave the conference room. And Captain, when you inevitably encounter another situation that challenges your expectations, remember this conversation. The discomfort you feel right now is growth happening. Most people spend their careers avoiding that feeling. Competent officers learn to seek it out. He nodded, stepping aside as she moved toward the door. Morrison waited in the corridor, having observed the interactions from a distance. He fell in a step beside her as they walked back toward the command offices. You're already making an impression, he said with evident approval. I'm establishing standards, she replied. The impression follows from that, not the other way around. They have 2 hours to process everything before the ceremony, Morrison noted. Think that's enough time? For most of them, yes. Thorne glanced back down the corridor, where several officers still clustered in small groups, their conversations animated. For Garrett and a few others, it's going to take demonstrated competence over time. Words only matter when they're backed by consistent action. The parade ground filled with personnel as 1,400 hours approached. 3,000 service members assembled in precise formations, their uniforms creating geometric patterns of color and rank across the asphalt. Thorne watched from a staging area adjacent to the ceremony platform, observing the organized chaos of military tradition preparing to execute flawlessly. Morrison stood beside her, reviewing the ceremony sequence one final time. It's straightforward, he said. National anthem, invocation, my remarks, transfer of authority, your remarks, pass and review. 30 minutes start to finish if everything runs on schedule. Which it will, Thorne replied, watching the final units move into position. Your staff knows how to execute a ceremony. They do, Morrison agreed, though I imagine they're more nervous about this one than usual. He glanced at her with dry amusement. Word of this morning's events has reached approximately 100% of base personnel by now. Everyone out there knows their incoming commander was detained at the gate and questioned like a security threat. Good, Thorne said simply. Better they hear it from informal channels than wondering why there's tension between command staff and their new CEO. Transparency, even uncomfortable transparency, builds trust faster than carefully managed narratives. Command Sergeant Major Blackwood approached, the senior enlisted leader on Base and Morrison's right hand for the past 3 years. He was a man in his early 50s with a weathered face of someone who had spent decades in field conditions. His uniform displayed enough ribbons to tell a story of extensive combat service, and his bearing radiated the quiet authority that distinguished exceptional senior NCOs from merely competent ones. Colonel Morrison, Colonel Thorne, everything is ready. He addressed them both with equal formality, but Thorne noticed the careful assessment in his eyes as he looked at her. The command staff is positioned, color guard is prepared, and all units report ready for inspection. Thank you, Sergeant Major, Morrison replied. Has Lieutenant Colonel Garrett arrived yet? Yes, sir. His unit is positioned on the north side. Blackwood paused, choosing his words carefully. They look particularly sharp today. I think they want to make a strong impression. Morrison and Thorne exchanged glances. That meant Garrett's special operations personnel, usually unconcerned with ceremonial precision, had decided this change of command warranted their best presentation. Whether that indicated respect or a subtle challenge remained unclear. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. The national anthem played across loudspeakers, 3,000 voices joining in unified song while the flag rippled overhead in the afternoon breeze. Chaplain offered invocation, his words carrying across the assembled formation with practice projection. Then Morrison stepped to the podium, his presence commanding immediate attention. He spoke about the base's mission and accomplishments during his tenure, highlighting unit achievements and individual acts of valor. He praised his staff and thanked the enlisted personnel who transformed command decisions into operational reality. Then his tone shifted, becoming more personal. Change of command ceremonies mark transitions in leadership, but they also represent continuity of purpose and mission. Today, I'm honored to transfer authority to one of the finest officers I've had the privilege of knowing. Morrison's voice carried weight that went beyond ceremonial formality. Colonel Evelyn Thorne and I served together decades ago when she was a young lieutenant with more tactical brilliance than she probably recognized in herself. I watched her lead soldiers under fire, make impossible decisions with limited information, and demonstrate courage that inspired everyone around her. Thorne stood at attention beside the podium, aware of 3,000 pairs of eyes shifting between Morrison and her. Since that time, Colonel Thorne has built a record of achievement that speaks for itself. Combat leadership in every major conflict of the past 2 decades. Decorations for valor that most officers never approach. Command positions at every level, each one executed with excellence that set new standards for those who followed. Morrison paused, letting those words settle across the formation. She is demanding, uncompromising about standards, and completely committed to the welfare of the soldiers under her command. This base is fortunate to have her. The formal transfer followed. The reading of orders and exchange of authority symbolized through the passing of the base colors from Morrison to Thorne. She accepted the flag, feeling its weight both literal and symbolic, then turned to face the assembled formation. Her remarks were brief and direct, matching her command style. She thanked Morrison for his service and leadership, acknowledged the base personnel for their professionalism, and outlined her expectations with clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. She spoke about operational excellence, honest communication, and mutual respect between all ranks. She mentioned her awareness of the morning's events without dwelling on them, framing the incident as an opportunity for the entire base to examine how assumptions influence professional judgment. Some of you have questions about my qualifications to command this installation, she said, her voice carrying across the silent formation. That's reasonable. I'm relatively unknown to most of you, and leadership transitions always create uncertainty. She paused, making eye contact with different sections of the assembly. I could list my credentials, my combat experience, my previous command assignments. Instead, I'm going to demonstrate my competence through consistent action and sound decision-making. Judge me on results, not on demographics or preconceptions. The formation remained absolutely still, attention focused with intensity that went beyond ceremonial formality. I expect the same approach from everyone serving on this base, Thorne continued. Assess each other based on demonstrated capability, not on comfortable assumptions. Hold yourselves and your fellow service members to standards that reflect the seriousness of our mission. And remember that we're here to defend our country and support our allies, not to validate our personal biases about who belongs in uniform. She concluded with traditional remarks about honor and duty, then stepped back as the pass and review began. Unit after unit marched past the reviewing stand, their precision reflecting hundreds of hours of training and discipline. Each commander rendered appropriate honors as they passed, and Thorne returned every salute with the crispness that demonstrated her respect for their professionalism. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's Special Operations Unit passed near the end of the ceremony. They marched with the same precision as conventional units, despite their usual indifference to parade ground formality. Garrett himself led them, his salute technically perfect even as his expression remained carefully neutral. Thorne held his gaze for the brief moment their eyes met, reading the unspoken challenge beneath his professional courtesy. The ceremony concluded with a departure of honors, and Morrison prepared to leave the base he had commanded for 3 years. He shook Thorne's hand one final time, his grip firm and his expression mixing satisfaction with genuine warmth. "Take care of them," he said quietly, gesturing toward the dispersing formation. "I intend to," she replied. "Thank you for the honest handover." Not every outgoing commander provides such clear assessment of personnel dynamics. "You're going to need every advantage," Morrison said with a slight smile. "Especially with Garrett. He respects combat competence above everything else. Once you demonstrate that in a way he can't dismiss, you'll have his loyalty. Until then, expect professional courtesy masking active skepticism." Noted, Thorne said. "How long did it take you to win him over?" "About 6 months and one joint operation that went badly wrong until I personally took tactical command and salvaged the mission." Morrison shook his head at the memory. "He's brilliant but stubborn. Good luck." Command Sergeant Major Blackwood remained after Morrison departed, clearly intending to brief Thorne on immediate operational matters. They walked toward the headquarters building while personnel continued dispersing across the base. "Ma'am, if you have time this afternoon, I'd like to review the enlisted personnel situation reports and discuss some ongoing disciplinary matters that require command attention." "Absolutely, Sergeant Major," Thorne replied. "Your assessment of personnel issues will be critical to my understanding of base dynamics." They entered the headquarters building, and Thorne noticed the subtle changes in how personnel reacted to her presence. Morning's uncertainty had been replaced by cautious respect. Service members stepped aside with proper deference, greetings carried appropriate formality, and the atmosphere reflected recognition of legitimate authority rather than skeptical assessment of questionable credentials. Her office, now officially hers rather than Morrison's, waited with the afternoon sun streaming through windows that overlooked the entire installation. Thorne moved to the desk, testing the chair's height and position, beginning the process of making the space her own. Blackwood arranged several folders on the conference table, each one labeled with unit designations and priority classifications. "Before we dive into specific issues," Blackwood said, "I want to address this morning's situation directly if you'll permit me." "Go ahead, Sergeant Major." "The enlisted personnel are embarrassed that gate guards and headquarters staff treated you the way they did." He spoke with the directness of someone who had earned the right to speak candidly. "They're also impressed with how you handled it. You could have made a spectacle of disciplining people, but you chose to use it as a teaching moment instead." "Discipline is what holds good order together," Thorne replied. "But teaching is what builds better judgment going forward. I'm not interested in punishment for its own sake." Blackwood nodded, his expression reflecting approval. "That approach will serve you well here, ma'am. This is a good base with solid personnel, but they're also human. They make assumptions and mistakes like everyone else." They spent the next 2 hours reviewing personnel situations that required command attention. Blackwood's assessments were thorough and unsparing, identifying both exceptional performers and problem cases with equal clarity. He spoke about unit morale, training readiness, and the subtle dynamics that distinguished highly functional commands from merely adequate ones. A knock interrupted their review. Captain Vance appeared in the doorway, his expression carrying visible urgency. "Ma'am, we have a developing situation. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's unit received emergency tasking for immediate deployment. They're requesting priority access to armory and transport resources." Thorne checked her watch. "What's the nature of the tasking?" "Time-sensitive intelligence on a high-value target in our operational sector," Vance replied. "Garrett says they need wheels up in 90 minutes to make the window." "Where's Lieutenant Colonel Garrett now?" she asked. "En route to your office, ma'am. He said he needs command authorization for the resource allocation." "Show him in when he arrives," Thorne said. "Sergeant Major, this might be relevant to our conversation about operational dynamics." Blackwood's expression suggested he understood exactly what she meant. Garrett moved fast when opportunities presented themselves, and his requests often came with implicit time pressure that discouraged detailed scrutiny. Garrett arrived 3 minutes later, moving with the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to compressed timelines. He carried a tablet displaying tactical maps and intelligence summaries. "Ma'am, I need authorization to deploy Alpha Team within the next 90 minutes. We have actionable intelligence on a target that won't be available past 20 to 100 hours local time." "Walk me through it," Thorne said, gesturing toward the conference table. "What's the target and why is the window so narrow?" Garrett spread his tactical display across the table's surface, bringing up satellite imagery and intelligence assessments. "High-value target confirmed at this location," he said, indicating a structure in a densely populated urban area. "Our intelligence indicates he's meeting with regional cell leaders tonight only. Miss this window, and we won't get another opportunity for months." Thorne studied the imagery with the practiced eye of someone who had reviewed thousands of tactical situations. "What's your source reliability on this intelligence?" Garrett hesitated for a fraction of a second, and she recognized that pause as significant. "Multiple sources, ma'am. We've been tracking this target for 6 weeks." "That's not what I asked," she replied calmly. "What's your source reliability assessment? Is this confirmed intelligence or probable intelligence?" His jaw tightened slightly. "It's high probability, ma'am. We assess 70% confidence that the target will be at this location tonight." 70%, she repeated, her tone neutral. "And what's your collateral damage assessment for an operation in this urban environment?" "Minimal," Garrett said with confidence. "We've planned precision entry and extraction. Low profile, minimal engagement, controlled environment." Thorne pulled up additional imagery, zooming out to show the surrounding area. "This structure is surrounded by residential buildings within 50 meters on 3 sides. Market area here," she indicated, "with evening activity that will peak around the time you're planning entry." "What's your civilian evacuation protocol?" "We don't need evacuation for this type of operation," Garrett replied, and she heard the first hint of impatience in his voice. "Ma'am, we're running out of planning time. I need authorization to access resources and begin final preparation." "You need authorization," she agreed, "but you're not getting it yet." She met his eyes directly. "This is exactly the pattern Colonel Morrison warned me about. Compressed timeline, high confidence assessment, request framed as urgent necessity. But when I examine the actual intelligence, I see probability, not certainty, and I see civilian risk factors you're downplaying." "Ma'am, with respect, this is what Special Operations does," Garrett said, his voice hardening. "We act on time-sensitive intelligence with acceptable risk parameters. If we wait for perfect certainty, we never act at all." "I'm not asking for perfect certainty," Thorne replied. "I'm asking for honest risk assessment and realistic contingency planning. Your 70% confidence means 30% chance this intelligence is wrong. What happens when your team hits that structure and the target isn't there?" "We extract and reassess," he said flatly. "Through a residential area, now, on alert with your presence compromised," she continued. "With potential civilian casualties if the situation deteriorates. And with our intelligence network exposed because we acted on probability rather than confirmation." She pulled up additional files on her own tablet. "I've been reading your after-action reports, Lieutenant Colonel. You have a pattern of optimistic risk assessments followed by operations that encounter complications you didn't adequately plan for." Garrett's expression closed down completely. "Ma'am, are you denying authorization for this operation?" "I'm denying authorization for this operation under current parameters," Thorne clarified. "You want to deploy on 70% confidence with inadequate civilian risk mitigation and compressed planning time. That's not acceptable risk management." "The target will be gone by morning," Garrett said, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "Then we'll find him again when we have better intelligence and better operational conditions," she replied without heat. "I will not authorize operations that expose my personnel and civilians to unnecessary risk based on probable rather than confirmed intelligence." Blackwood watched this exchange without intervention, but Thorne saw approval in his expression. This was the moment Morrison had predicted, the confrontation where she would either establish her authority over special operations or lose credibility by deferring to Garrett's expertise. "Ma'am, I need to be clear about something," Garrett said, his tone formal. My unit operates under protocols that assume command support for time-sensitive operations. If you're going to second-guess every tactical decision, you'll cripple our effectiveness. I'm not second-guessing your tactical decisions, Thorne said. I'm exercising command oversight of operations that carry significant risk. If you bring me confirmed intelligence with proper risk assessment and realistic contingency planning, you'll have my authorization. But I will not rubber stamp operations because you've framed them as urgent. The silence stretched between them, weighted with implications that extended beyond this single operation. Garrett's respect would not come from deferring to his judgment. It would come from demonstrating that her oversight improved rather than hindered operational effectiveness. How long would it take to improve your intelligence confidence? She asked, changing her tone from confrontation to problem-solving. Garrett paused, clearly recalibrating his approach. If we deploy additional surveillance assets tonight, we could have 90% confidence by dawn tomorrow. Do that, Thorne said. Give me 90% confidence, proper civilian risk assessment, and contingency planning for complications. Then we'll authorize the operation. That means waiting 24 hours, Garrett said. The target might move. He might, she agreed. Or your intelligence might be wrong, and you'd be risking your team for nothing. 24 hours to increase confidence from 70 to 90% is operationally sound decision-making, not excessive caution. Garrett stood slowly, gathering his tablet with movements that suggested carefully controlled frustration. With your permission, ma'am, I'll redeploy my surveillance assets and brief you tomorrow morning with updated intelligence. Granted, Thorne replied. And Lieutenant Colonel, I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to obstruct your operations. I'm trying to ensure they succeed with acceptable risk. When you bring me solid operational planning, you'll find me very supportive of special operations missions. Understood, ma'am, he said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. After he left, Blackwood allowed himself a slight smile. That was well handled, ma'am. Garrett needed someone willing to push back on his compressed timeline approach. Colonel Morrison usually gave him more latitude than was probably wise. Morrison mentioned he won Garrett's respect through a joint operation. Thorne said, Any details about what happened? Hostage situation that went badly wrong, Blackwood replied. 3 friendly casualties and deteriorating tactical position. Colonel Morrison personally took command of the assault element and turned the situation around. Garrett respects combat competence demonstrated under fire, not theoretical knowledge demonstrated in briefing rooms. Then I'll need to wait for a similar opportunity, Thorne said calmly. In the meantime, I'll continue making sound operational decisions whether he respects them or not. Blackwood nodded with evident satisfaction. Ma'am, I think you're going to do just fine here. The next morning arrived with fog blanketing the base, reducing visibility to less than 100 meters. Thorne completed her morning run through the gray stillness, passing personnel who rendered appropriate greetings with noticeably more confidence than the previous day. Word of her confrontation with Garrett had spread through unofficial channels with the speed characteristic of military communities. Opinions varied about whether she had demonstrated appropriate caution or excessive interference. But everyone agreed she had established her willingness to challenge even the base's most autonomous unit. She showered and changed into her duty uniform, then made her way to headquarters through morning routines that were becoming familiar. The operations center hummed with controlled activity, personnel monitoring communications, and tracking ongoing missions with practiced efficiency. Major Hendricks looked up from a tactical display as she entered, his expression carrying more respect than their previous encounters. Good morning, ma'am. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett requested a briefing slot at 0700. He's waiting in the conference room with updated intelligence on yesterday's operation request. Show me what came in overnight first, Thorne said, moving to the main display where regional monitoring data streamed in continuous updates. I want context before his briefing. Hendricks pulled up surveillance reports and signal intelligence summaries. Garrett's team deployed enhanced observation assets to the target location at 2200 hours yesterday. They maintained coverage through the night and early morning. He highlighted several data points on the display. Confidence level on target presence increased to 92% as of 0600 this morning. They also identified 3 additional high-value targets at the location, which significantly increases operational value. What about civilian risk factors? She asked, studying the updated imagery. Garrett's team identified a 2-hour window between 0300 and 0500 when civilian activity drops to minimum levels. They've planned entry during that window with enhanced extraction protocols. Hendricks paused, then added with evident reluctance, "It's solid planning, ma'am. Much better than yesterday's proposal." "Good," Thorne said. "Let's hear his brief." Garrett waited in the conference room with 2 of his team leaders, all 3 men studying tactical displays with the intense focus that characterized special operations personnel. They stood when Thorne entered, their courtesy precise, but their expressions guarded. Garrett's bearing suggested he was prepared for another confrontation, but determined to present his case professionally. "Ma'am, thank you for your time." He activated the main display, bringing up the comprehensive intelligence package his team had assembled. "As you directed, we increased our surveillance coverage and confidence assessment. We now have 92% confidence that our primary target is at this location, along with 3 additional high-value targets we didn't know about yesterday." "Walk me through your operational plan," Thorne said, settling into a chair position where she could see both the display and Garrett's face. "Start with insertion and work through extraction." Garrett proceeded with methodical thoroughness, describing every phase of the operation with detail that addressed the concerns she had raised the previous day. His team had identified optimal insertion routes, established civilian evacuation protocols for the unlikely event of complications, and developed multiple contingency plans for various failure scenarios. The presentation reflected professional special operations planning executed by personnel who knew their business thoroughly. "What changed your approach between yesterday and today?" Thorne asked when he finished. Garrett met her eyes directly. "Yesterday, I was focused on speed and opportunity. You forced me to focus on risk management and realistic assessment." He paused, clearly weighing his next words. "I didn't appreciate that at the time, but the intelligence we gathered overnight revealed complexities I would have missed with compressed planning, such as the 3 additional targets," she said. "Yes, ma'am, and the fact that civilian activity patterns in that area are different than our initial assessment suggested. If we'd hit the target last night during the window I proposed, we would have encountered significantly more civilian presence than anticipated." Thorne studied the updated tactical display, examining sight lines and extraction routes with the careful attention of someone who had planned similar operations. "Your current plan addresses my concerns adequately. Authorization granted. When do you deploy?" "Tonight at 0300 local time," Garrett replied. "Mission duration estimated at 40 minutes from insertion to extraction. I want real-time communication maintained throughout the operation," she said. "Any complications, you contact me immediately." "Understood, ma'am." He hesitated, then added something that clearly required effort. "Thank you for forcing better planning yesterday. My team will be safer because of it." After Garrett and his team leaders departed, Major Hendricks remained behind with an expression mixing surprise and approval. "Ma'am, I've worked with Garrett for 18 months. That's the first time I've heard him thank anyone for challenging his operational planning." "He's a professional," Thorne replied. "Once he saw that my oversight improved rather than hindered his mission, he adjusted his assessment. That's what competent officers do." The day progressed through routine command activities, briefings and decisions that established her operational tempo and command style. She met with unit commanders, reviewed training schedules, and addressed personnel issues with the direct approach that was becoming her signature. By afternoon, word had spread about Garrett's return briefing and his acknowledgement that her intervention had improved mission planning. The story carried weight because it came from someone known for resisting command oversight. Evening brought heightened tension to the operations center. Garrett's team had deployed to the target area, and Thorne monitored their progress through encrypted communications and real-time surveillance feeds. Major Hendricks managed the tactical display, while Captain Vance coordinated support elements. Command Sergeant Major Blackwood appeared without being summoned, his presence reflecting the understanding that significant operations drew senior leadership attention. Alpha Team at insertion point. The communications specialist reported, his voice calm despite the operation's significance. Beginning approach to target structure. Thorne watched the surveillance feed, showing thermal signatures moving through darkened streets with practiced precision. Garrett's voice came through clearly, his tactical communications demonstrating the competence that had earned him command of special operations. His team moved like a single organism, each member positioned perfectly for mutual support while maintaining operational security. Contact with target building, Garrett reported. Beginning entry sequence. The next 8 minutes unfolded with the controlled chaos characteristic of special operations raids. Garrett's team breached the structure, secured the interior, and identified all 4 high-value targets exactly where intelligence had predicted. No shots fired, no complications, no civilian involvement. The extraction began with the same precision as entry, vehicles appearing exactly on schedule to transport both operators and detain targets back to secure locations. Alpha Team clear of target area, Garrett reported. Mission successful, all objectives achieved, 0 casualties. The operations center erupted in subdued celebration, personnel exchanging satisfied looks and quiet acknowledgments of a mission well executed. Thorne allowed herself a slight smile while maintaining her command presence. Excellent work, Alpha Team. Return to base for full debrief at 0900 tomorrow. Roger that, ma'am, Garrett replied, and something in his voice suggested his assessment of her command had shifted significantly. Appreciate the support. After the operations center returned to routine monitoring, Blackwood approached Thorne with evident satisfaction. Ma'am, that operation success is going to carry a lot of weight with the rest of the base. Garrett's team doesn't give credit easily, but they'll remember that your planning requirements improve their mission. I'm more interested in the fact that 4 high-value targets are now in custody, Thorne replied. The politics of respect are secondary to operational outcomes. With respect, ma'am, in military commands they're connected, Blackwood said. Operational success builds the credibility that makes future operations easier to authorize and execute. Garrett just demonstrated to the entire base that your oversight enhances rather than constrains special operations effectiveness. Thorne considered that assessment while watching the surveillance feeds continue their routine monitoring. Then I hope it translates into more professional planning and less compressed timeline pressure on future operations. It will, Blackwood assured her. You've established something important in your first 48 hours of command. Personnel are starting to understand that you make decisions based on operational merit rather than politics or assumption. The night shift took over operations center duties, and Thorne prepared to return to her quarters. Captain Vance intercepted her before she left, carrying a message folder marked urgent. Ma'am, this came in from Regional Command. They're requesting your participation in a joint training exercise next week involving all senior commanders in the sector. What's the nature of the exercise? She asked, scanning the briefing document. Combined arms scenario with emphasis on coordination between conventional and special operations forces, Vance replied. It's essentially a test of command decision-making under complex tactical conditions. Thorne noted the timing with dry recognition. 1 week into her command, and regional leadership wanted to assess her tactical competence in front of her peers and subordinates. The exercise would serve as either validation of her qualifications or exposure of any weaknesses in her command capability. Acknowledge acceptance, she told Vance, and pull together a planning team to review the exercise parameters. I want our base representation to demonstrate the same operational excellence Garrett's team showed tonight. Yes, ma'am, Vance replied with evident enthusiasm. I'll coordinate with Major Hendricks and have preliminary analysis ready by tomorrow afternoon. The joint training exercise consumed the next 5 days with intensive preparation. Major Hendricks assembled a planning team that included representatives from every major unit on base, creating a comprehensive approach to the complex scenario Regional Command had designed. The exercise parameters presented a nightmare scenario involving simultaneous conventional and special operations missions with limited resources and compressed timelines, exactly the kind of situation that exposed weaknesses in command decision-making. Thorne reviewed the planning materials with the methodical attention she brought to every operational challenge. The scenario involved hostage rescue, area denial operations, and coordinated strikes against multiple high-value targets, all executed within a fictional region designed to replicate actual operational theaters. 12 base commanders would participate, their decisions evaluated by senior officers from Regional Command and recorded for subsequent analysis. "Ma'am, if I may offer an observation," Hendricks said during one planning session. "This exercise is designed to test exactly the kind of oversight you demonstrated with Lieutenant Colonel Garrett. Multiple competing priorities, incomplete intelligence, and pressure to make rapid decisions with significant consequences." "You think Regional Command is testing me specifically?" Thorne replied, studying tactical maps spread across the conference table. "I think they're curious how the first female base commander in this region handles complex tactical situations under observation," Hendricks said carefully. "Whether that's official evaluation or unofficial assessment, the result is the same. Your performance will be scrutinized more closely than other participants. Then we'll ensure the performance justifies scrutiny," she said simply. "What concerns you most about our current approach?" They spent hours refining their operational plan, identifying potential complications, and developing contingency responses. Garrett joined several planning sessions, his earlier resistance transformed into professional collaboration. He offered insights about special operations integration that strengthened their overall approach, and his team leaders contributed tactical expertise that enhanced their contingency planning. The day before the exercise, Thorne gathered her entire command staff for final coordination. Every department head attended, along with senior NCOs and unit commanders who would support the exercise execution. The conference room filled beyond capacity, personnel standing along walls when chairs ran out. "Tomorrow we demonstrate this base's operational capability to Regional Command and our peer installations," Thorne began without preamble. "Some of you may be aware that my command is being evaluated more closely than others. That's fine. Scrutiny reveals either competence or weakness, and I'm confident we'll demonstrate the former." She activated the main display, showing their operational plan. "We've prepared for 3 primary scenarios and 15 potential complications. Each department knows their responsibilities and coordination requirements. Our advantage isn't superior resources or special intelligence. It's thorough planning and professional execution by personnel who understand their roles completely." Lieutenant Colonel Garrett spoke from his position near the tactical display. "Ma'am, my team has coordinated with conventional units on integration protocols. We're ready to demonstrate how special operations and standard forces can work together when command provides clear direction and realistic expectations." Several officers exchanged glances at that statement, recognizing it as Garrett's public endorsement of Thorne's command approach. His words carried weight precisely because he had initially resisted her oversight. The exercise began at 0600 the next morning at a regional training facility designed to replicate combat conditions. 12 command posts occupied separate buildings, each one equipped with tactical displays and communication systems connecting them to exercise controllers and simulated battlefield elements. Regional commanders and senior staff circulated between facilities, observing decision-making processes and evaluating command performance. General Whitmore, the regional commander responsible for all installations in the sector, visited Thorne's command post an hour into the exercise. He was a man in his early 60s with the bearing of someone who had commanded at every level from platoon to division. His expression revealed nothing as he watched Thorne coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous challenges. The exercise scenario had escalated rapidly, presenting exactly the kind of compressed timeline pressure that characterized real combat operations. Thorne faced 3 critical decisions within a 15-minute window, each one carrying significant risk and competing for limited resources. General Whitmore positioned himself where he could observe her command style without interfering, his presence adding pressure to an already intense situation. Major Hendricks, shift 3rd Platoon from supporting area denial to hostage rescue backup, Thorne directed, her voice calm despite the tactical complexity. Captain Vance, coordinate with Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's team for simultaneous entry. Timing window is 7 minutes from my mark. Ma'am, that reduces our area denial capability below minimum threshold, Hendricks cautioned, following proper protocol by questioning decisions that appeared risky. Acceptable risk given intelligence showing hostage situation deteriorating faster than projected, she replied. Area denial becomes irrelevant if hostages are executed before we secure the location. General Whitmore made a notation on his tablet, but offered no comment. Exercise controllers fed additional complications into the scenario, simulating equipment failures and intelligence updates that required immediate reassessment. Thorne processed each development with methodical efficiency, adjusting her operational approach while maintaining focus on primary objectives. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, you have authorization for alternative entry point if primary route shows hostile presence, she said, reviewing surveillance feeds. Your tactical judgment for entry method, but coordinate timing with conventional forces for mutual support. Roger that, Garrett responded through the communication system. Appreciate the flexibility, ma'am. The scenario continued escalating for another 90 minutes. Exercise controllers clearly testing how much pressure each command post could handle before decision-making degraded. Several installations reported mission failures or excessive simulated casualties, their commanders struggling with the compressed timelines and competing priorities. Thorne's command post maintained steady performance throughout, each crisis managed with planning and professional execution rather than improvisation. When the exercise concluded at 1100 hours, her unit had achieved all primary objectives with acceptable losses and efficient resource utilization. General Whitmore remained in the command post during the immediate after-action discussion, listening to Thorne's assessment of their performance and areas for improvement. She was characteristically direct, identifying both successes and mistakes without sugarcoating either category. Colonel Thorne, the general said when she finished, that was impressive command decision-making under significant pressure. You maintained operational focus while adapting to changing conditions, and your integration of special operations with conventional forces showed sophisticated understanding of combined arms doctrine. Thank you, sir, she replied. My team executed the plan professionally. Your team followed clear direction from a commander who knows how to prioritize under pressure, Whitmore corrected. He glanced around the command post, noting the confident bearing of her staff. I've been curious about your command approach since your arrival was announced. Today, answer my questions thoroughly. Other regional commanders filtered into Thorne's command post during the afternoon debrief session, ostensibly to exchange observations about the exercise, but clearly motivated by curiosity about her performance. Several had heard stories about her confrontational first day and her handling of Garrett's Special Operations Unit. They approached with professional courtesy that masked varying degrees of skepticism about whether she belonged in their peer group. Colonel Thorne, one commander said, a man named Patterson who commanded an installation twice the size of hers, I noticed you authorized Lieutenant Colonel Garrett to modify entry procedures during the hostage scenario. That's significant operational discretion for special operations during a coordinated mission. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett is a professional with extensive tactical experience, Thorne replied evenly. My job is to provide strategic direction and resource allocation, not to micromanage entry procedures. I trust my Special Operations Commander to make sound tactical decisions within the parameters I establish. Patterson nodded slowly, his expression suggesting he was reassessing whatever assumptions he had brought to the conversation. That's a mature command approach. Not every senior officer has the confidence to delegate that kind of authority. Another commander, A woman named Colonel Richardson, who led an installation focused on logistics operations, approached with more direct curiosity. Colonel Thorne, I'll be honest. When I heard a female officer was assuming base command in this region, I wondered how you'd handle the inevitable skepticism. Today's exercise demonstrated capability that makes such concerns irrelevant. Capability has always been gender-neutral, Thorne replied. The only question is whether people recognize it when they see it, or whether they let assumptions override evidence. Richardson smiled slightly. I suspect you've encountered more assumption than evidence-based assessment during your career. Enough to recognize the pattern, Thorne agreed. But I've also encountered enough professional officers who judge on merit to maintain faith in the system. The afternoon concluded with formal exercise critiques delivered by regional command staff. General Whitmore's assessment highlighted Thorne's command post as demonstrating exemplary decision-making under pressure, noting specifically her integration of special operations with conventional forces and her ability to prioritize effectively during compressed timelines. Several other installations received positive assessments, but none received the unqualified endorsement Whitmore offered regarding her performance. During the drive back to base, Major Hendricks allowed himself visible satisfaction. Ma'am, that exercise eliminated any remaining questions about your tactical competence. General Whitmore doesn't give endorsements like that casually. The exercise revealed what thorough planning and professional execution can achieve, Thorne replied. Our performance reflected, well, on everyone who participated. Back at base, word the exercise results spread rapidly through informal networks. Personnel who had watched their new commander with cautious assessment now discussed her performance with evident pride. She had represented their installation successfully in front of regional leadership and peer commanders, validating the base's operational capabilities through her command decisions. 3 weeks into her command, Thorne had established operational rhythms that reflected her leadership style. Morning briefings ran with efficient precision, decision-making followed clear protocols, and the base operated with the confident professionalism that distinguished Weld installations. The initial skepticism that had greeted her arrival had transformed into something approaching institutional pride. Personnel spoke about their commander's tactical competence with the satisfaction of people who knew their leadership could perform under pressure. The transformation was most evident in interactions with Lieutenant Colonel Garrett and his Special Operations Unit. What had begun as professional hostility had evolved into genuine collaborative respect. Garrett sought her input on operational planning, and his team leaders treated her assessments with the seriousness they reserved for combatus commanders. The morning began routinely with standard briefings and administrative decisions. Major Hendricks presented intelligence summaries. Captain Vance reviewed logistics status, and department heads reported on their areas of responsibility. Nothing suggested the day would become extraordinary until a priority message arrived from Regional Command at 09:30. Ma'am, Captain Vance said, entering her office with visible urgency. General Whitmore's office sent immediate tasking. There's been a helicopter crash in a mountain sector, civilian aircraft with 8 passengers, including a congressional delegation. Rescue operations are being coordinated through our base as nearest military facility with appropriate resources. Thorne stood immediately, moving toward the operations center. What's our current information on the crash site? Location confirmed in mountainous terrain approximately 40 miles northeast, Vance replied, matching her pace through the corridor. Weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly, visibility dropping below safe flight parameters. Initial assessments suggest survivors based on emergency locator beacon, but terrain makes ground access extremely difficult. The operations center had already shifted into crisis response mode, personnel manning additional communication stations and pulling up topographical maps of the crash region. Major Hendricks coordinated with search and rescue assets, while Command Sergeant Major Blackwood organized ground support elements. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett stood near the tactical display, his expression reflecting the focused intensity that characterized his approach to urgent situations. Ma'am, Garrett said as she approached, My team can deploy immediately with mountain rescue equipment. We have personnel trained for high-altitude extraction in adverse conditions. Weather is closing the window for helicopter insertion, Hendricks added, highlighting meteorological data on the main display. We have maybe 90 minutes before conditions make flight operations too dangerous. Thorne studied the terrain maps and weather projections with rapid assessment. The crash site occupied a narrow valley surrounded by steep ridges, accessible by air only through a limited approach corridor. Ground routes would require 12 to 15 hours to reach the location, far too long if survivors needed immediate medical attention. The operational window demanded immediate decision-making with incomplete information and significant risk. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, prepare your team for immediate deployment, she directed. Major Hendricks, coordinate with Regional Command for any additional resources they can provide. Captain Vance, I need complete weather updates every 10 minutes. She pulled up enhanced satellite imagery of the crash area, examining approach vectors and extraction options with the practiced eye of someone who had planned similar operations. The terrain presented multiple complications, but the weather represented the critical constraint. If they waited for better conditions, survivors might not survive. If they launched immediately and weather deteriorated beyond projections, rescue personnel would become casualties themselves. General Whitmore's voice came through secure communication. Colonel Thorne, this is General Whitmore. I'm monitoring your coordination from Regional Command. What's your assessment? Sir, we have a narrow operational window for helicopter insertion before weather makes flight operations too dangerous, she replied. Ground routes require too much time if there are casualties requiring immediate medical intervention. I'm preparing to authorize Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's team for immediate deployment with medical support. Understood, Whitmore said. I'm authorizing additional air assets if you need them, but the decision to launch given weather conditions rests with you as ground commander. What's your risk assessment? Thorne glanced at the meteorological projections again, calculating probabilities with the cold precision that characterized command decisions involving human lives. Sir, conditions are marginal but acceptable for experienced pilots with proper equipment. Primary risk is weather deterioration during extraction phase, which will mitigate with continuous monitoring and abort protocols. Your call, Colonel, Whitmore said. Regional Command will support whatever decision you make. The weight of that authority settled across her shoulders. 8 civilians, including congressional representatives trapped in deteriorating conditions, rescue personnel ready to deploy into marginal weather, and operational responsibility that would be scrutinized regardless of outcome. Success would be credited to professional rescue operations. Failure would be examined for command errors and questionable judgment. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett appeared at her position, his gear already staged and his team ready for immediate departure. Ma'am, we're prepared to launch on your authorization. Weather's getting worse every minute we delay. She met his eyes, reading the confidence there, but also the acknowledgement of risk. Your professional assessment, Lieutenant Colonel. Can your team execute this rescue under current conditions? Yes, ma'am, he replied without hesitation. Conditions are challenging, but within our capability. My pilots have flown worse, and my extraction team can handle the terrain. Medical requirements, she asked, turning to the base surgeon who had joined the operations center coordination. 2 flight medics equipped for trauma care, the surgeon replied. They're staged with Garrett's team and ready for immediate departure. Thorne looked at the assembled leadership in the operations center. Every face reflected the same tension between urgency and caution. Blackwood stood near the communications station, his expression carefully neutral, but his bearings suggesting confidence in whatever decision she made. Hendricks monitored weather updates with visible concern. Vance coordinated logistics with the efficiency that had become his trademark. Authorization granted, she said clearly. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, you are authorized for immediate deployment. Maintain continuous communication throughout the operation. Any weather deterioration beyond projections, you abort immediately and return to base. Roger that, ma'am, Garrett acknowledged. Alpha Team departing now. Thorne watched through surveillance feeds as Garrett's team boarded 2 helicopters, their movements reflecting the practiced efficiency of personnel who train constantly for exactly these situations. The aircraft lifted off precisely on schedule, disappearing into gray skies that looked progressively more threatening with each passing minute. The operations center settled into the controlled tension that accompanied high-risk operations. Personnel monitored multiple communication channels simultaneously, tracking weather conditions, helicopter positions, and coordination with regional assets. Thorne remained at the tactical display, following the aircraft's progress through mountainous terrain toward the crash site. General Whitmore maintained open communication from regional command. Colonel Thorne, I'm observing your coordination. Professional operations so far. Thank you, sir. We'll have first assessment from the crash site within 15 minutes. The helicopters reached the crash site after 23 minutes of flight through progressively deteriorating conditions. Garrett's voice came through with the clipped precision of someone managing complex operations under pressure. Alpha Team on site. Visual confirmation of wreckage. We have survivors, counting 8 individuals, multiple injuries visible. Beginning extraction procedures. Medical status, Thorne requested. 2 critical, 3 serious, 3 ambulatory, Garrett reported. Flight medics assessing now. We'll need immediate hospital transport upon return. Understood, Thorne replied. Medical facilities are prepared and standing by. The extraction proceeded with methodical care despite weather conditions that continued degrading. Garrett's team worked with the efficiency that came from extensive training, stabilizing injured survivors and preparing them for helicopter transport. The operation required 45 minutes at the crash site, every minute adding risk as visibility dropped and wind conditions intensified. Ma'am, Hendricks said quietly, weather projections show conditions deteriorating faster than initial models predicted. Garrett's return flight is going to be more challenging than insertion. She studied the updated meteorological data with growing concern. The safe flight window was closing, but rushing the extraction process could compromise survivor care. Keep monitoring and update Garrett every 5 minutes. He needs current information to make tactical decisions about extraction timing. Alpha Team preparing for departure, Garrett reported. All survivors secured. 2 critical patients stabilized for transport. Requesting clearance for return flight. Thorne checked weather data one final time. Clearance granted. Updated weather information shows deteriorating conditions. Exercise caution on return approach. The return flight consumed 38 minutes that felt considerably longer. Wind conditions pushed the helicopter's operational limits, and visibility dropped to levels that required instrument flight procedures. Garrett maintained calm communication throughout, his voice reflecting professional focus despite challenging circumstances. His pilots demonstrated exceptional skill, navigating through weather that would have grounded less experienced crews. Alpha Team 5 minutes from base, Garrett reported, his voice tight with concentration. Visibility minimal, navigating on instruments. All survivors stable. Thorne watched the radar tracking display, showing 2 aircraft approaching through weather that had degraded to the edge of flight safety parameters. The operations center remained silent except for essential communication, every person aware they were witnessing command decisions with potentially historic consequences. General Whitmore maintained his communication link, observing without interference, but clearly assessing every aspect of her crisis management. Ground crews are positioned for immediate offload, Major Hendricks reported. Medical teams ready at landing zone. Ambulances staged for transport to hospital facilities. The minutes stretched with agonizing slowness. Weather data continued showing deterioration, wind gusts approaching limits that would make landing dangerous even for experienced pilots. Thorne monitored multiple feeds simultaneously, processing information with a methodical focus that had characterized her entire career. She had authorized this mission based on calculated risk assessment. Now she watched that calculation play out in real time, with human lives hanging in the balance. Alpha Team on final approach, Garrett announced. requesting landing clearance. Clearance granted, Thorne replied. Ground crew standing by. The first helicopter materialized through gray fog like a ghost emerging from nothing, its running lights barely visible until it was directly over the landing zone. The aircraft settled with careful precision despite wind conditions that pushed it sideways during final descent. Ground crews moved immediately, their choreographed response reflecting extensive training and professional discipline. First aircraft down safe, Hendricks reported. For survivors, offloading now. The second helicopter appeared moments later, fighting the same wind conditions with visible effort. Its pilot made 2 approach attempts, both aborted when gusts pushed the aircraft dangerously off course. Thorne watched without comment, trusting the pilot's judgment about safe landing parameters while tension mounted with each passing second. Second aircraft coming around for third approach. Garrett's voice carried strain, but remained controlled. Wind conditions at edge of safety limits. The helicopter steadied on its third approach, the pilot compensating for wind with adjustments so subtle they were barely visible from the ground. The aircraft touched down with a slight bounce, then settled firmly. Ground crews rushed forward immediately, beginning the critical process of offloading injured survivors who had already endured too much. All aircraft down safe, Garrett reported, and the relief in his voice was unmistakable. All survivors transferred to medical care. Mission complete. The operations center erupted in subdued celebration. Personnel exchanging satisfied looks and quiet acknowledgments of successful execution under extreme pressure. Thorne allowed herself a brief moment of relief before shifting focus to post-mission requirements. Excellent work, Alpha Team, she said clearly. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett, ensure your personnel are debriefed and medically evaluated. They performed exceptionally under difficult conditions. Roger that, ma'am, Garrett replied. Thank you for authorizing the mission. Those survivors wouldn't have made it through the night in those conditions. General Whitmore's voice cut through the communications. Colonel Thorne, outstanding command decision-making and crisis coordination. You assessed risk accurately, deployed resources effectively, and achieved mission success under conditions that would have justified delay or cancellation. I'm forwarding commendation recommendations for Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's team, and I'll be including specific recognition of your command judgment in my report to senior leadership. Thank you, sir, Thorne replied. My team executed professionally throughout. Your team followed clear direction from a commander who made sound decisions under pressure, Whitmore corrected. That's the definition of effective leadership, Colonel. The medical facilities worked through the afternoon, stabilizing and treating the 8 survivors. 2 remained in critical condition, but alive because of rapid extraction and expert medical care. The congressional delegation members, shaken but largely uninjured, expressed profound gratitude for the rescue operation that had saved their lives. By evening, the full scope of the day's events had spread throughout the base and beyond. Regional media covered the story, highlighting the successful rescue of prominent officials under challenging conditions. Military channels discussed the operation as an example of effective crisis response, noting specifically the command decisions that had authorized immediate deployment despite marginal weather conditions. Thorne returned to her office after ensuring all post-mission requirements were addressed. She found Lieutenant Colonel Garrett waiting outside, still in his flight gear, his expression carrying something she hadn't seen before in their interactions. Ma'am, if you have a moment, he said, his tone lacking any of the earlier professional skepticism. Come in, Lieutenant Colonel, she replied, gesturing toward the conference table. Garrett settled into a chair with the careful movements of someone who had spent hours under physical and mental strain. Ma'am, I need to say something that's overdue. When you arrived 3 weeks ago, I doubted whether a commander without special operations background could effectively oversee my unit. I questioned your tactical judgment and resisted your oversight. I'm aware, Thorne said mildly. Today's operation demonstrated how wrong I was, he continued. Your decision to authorize immediate deployment was exactly correct. Your risk assessment was accurate. Your coordination was professional. and your communication throughout gave my team the support we needed without micromanaging our execution. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. You're the best base commander I've served under, and I apologize for not recognizing that sooner. The words carried weight precisely because they came from someone who rarely offered praise and never gave it without meaning it completely. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel, Thorne replied. Your team's performance today demonstrated why special operations personnel earn their reputation. You executed a dangerous mission flawlessly under conditions that would have challenged anyone. We executed it because you gave us clear authorization when we needed it, Garrett said. Another commander might have delayed for better weather or deferred to regional command for the decision. You assessed the situation, made the call, and accepted responsibility for the outcome. That's command presence. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 2 members of the congressional delegation who had survived the crash requested a meeting to express their gratitude personally. Thorne received them in her office, noting their visible exhaustion despite medical treatment and rest. Colonel Thorne, the senior representative, began, a woman named Congresswoman Patricia Moss, who chaired a Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. We're here because we owe you and your team our lives. The rescue operation yesterday was extraordinary, and we understand it involved significant command decisions under pressure. My team performed their duties professionally, Thorne replied. I'm grateful the operation succeeded and you're recovering well. We've been briefed on the weather conditions and operational risks, the second representative added, Congressman James Torres. We understand you authorized the mission when conditions were marginal at best. That took courage and sound judgment. It took accurate risk assessment and confidence in exceptional personnel, Thorne corrected. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett and his team deserved authorization because they were capable of executing the mission successfully. Congresswoman Moss exchanged glances with her colleague. Colonel, I've been working defense issues for 15 years. I've met hundreds of military commanders. What you demonstrated yesterday represents exactly the kind of leadership our armed forces need. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm also aware that your command here has drawn attention because you're the first female base commander in this region. I'm aware of that attention, Thorne acknowledged. Then you should know that yesterday's operation will be discussed at the highest levels of military leadership and congressional oversight, Moss continued. You made difficult decisions under extreme pressure, and the outcome validated your judgment completely. That carries significant weight in conversations about command qualifications and leadership opportunities. After the congressional representatives departed, Command Sergeant Major Blackwood appeared with evident satisfaction. Ma'am, word of yesterday's operation has reached well beyond our base. I've received messages from personnel at other installations asking about your leadership approach. You've become something of a reference point for effective command decision-making. I made sound decisions based on accurate assessment, Thorne replied. That should be standard rather than remarkable. It should be, Blackwood agreed. But in practice, many commanders avoid risk when safer options exist. You chose the right course of action when the safer choice would have been to wait for better conditions. That distinction matters. The afternoon brought another development. General Whitmore arrived at the base personally, his presence indicating the significance of the previous day's events beyond routine operations. He met with Thorne privately in her office, his expression reflecting both professional respect and genuine approval. Colonel Thorne, yesterday's rescue operation has been forwarded to Pentagon leadership as an exemplary case study in crisis command decision-making. Your authorization to proceed under marginal conditions saved 8 lives, including 2 who would not have survived delayed rescue. He paused, letting that assessment settle. I'm recommending you for several opportunities that reflect your demonstrated capabilities. Sir, I'm focused on commanding this base effectively, Thorne said. I understand, Whitmore replied, but effective commanders don't remain in one position indefinitely. Your performance here has attracted attention from senior leadership interested in officers who can handle complex operational environments. He stood, preparing to depart. Keep doing what you're doing, Colonel. The rest will follow naturally. 6 weeks into her command, Thorne had transformed the base into something that reflected her leadership philosophy completely. Operations ran with efficient precision. Personnel understood their roles and executed them professionally, and the installation had earned recognition throughout the region for operational excellence. The skepticism that had greeted her arrival had been replaced by institutional pride and confidence in their commander's capabilities. The morning briefing assembled the full command staff, their interactions now characterized by professional collaboration rather than the cautious assessment that had marked early meetings. Major Hendricks presented intelligence summaries with the confidence of someone whose assessments were valued and utilized. Captain Vance coordinated logistics with efficiency that had improved measurably since the rescue operation. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett contributed special operations perspectives that enhanced rather than competed with conventional planning. The most visible transformation appeared in the relationship between Thorne and her staff. What had begun with skepticism and resistance had evolved into genuine professional respect. Officers sought her guidance on complex situations, confident that her assessments would be sound and her direction clear. Enlisted personnel spoke about their commander with the satisfaction of people who knew their leadership was competent and fair. "Ma'am," Command Sergeant Major Blackwood said after the briefing concluded, "I've been asked to coordinate a base-wide recognition ceremony for personnel who participated in the rescue operation. General Whitmore will be attending personally to present commendations." "Schedule it for next week," Thorne replied. "Ensure every member of Lieutenant Colonel Garrett's team receives appropriate recognition. They earned it through exceptional performance under difficult conditions." The ceremony took place on the parade ground under clear skies that contrasted sharply with the weather that had challenged the rescue operation. 3,000 personnel assembled in formation while General Whitmore presented commendations to Garrett's team, the flight medics, and ground support personnel who had contributed to the mission's success. The general's remarks highlighted not just the rescue itself, but the command decisions that had made it possible. Effective military operations require personnel at every level performing their duties with professional excellence, Whitmore said, his voice carrying across the assembled formation. But they also require commanders willing to make difficult decisions under pressure, to authorize necessary action despite risk, and to accept responsibility for outcomes. Colonel Thorne demonstrated all of those qualities during the rescue operation, and her command judgment saved 8 lives. After the ceremony, congressional representatives who had survived the crash returned to present their own recognition. Congresswoman Moss approached the podium with evident emotion, her voice carrying weight that went beyond official gratitude. 6 weeks ago, my colleagues and I faced what we believed were our final moments. The rescue that saved our lives resulted from split-second decisions made under extreme pressure by people who understood their responsibilities and executed them flawlessly. She turned toward Thorne, who stood at attention beside the reviewing stand. Colonel Thorne authorized immediate deployment when safer alternatives existed. That decision required courage, professional judgment, and confidence in her personnel. It also required her to accept responsibility if the outcome had been different. The formation remained absolutely silent. Every service member focused on the Congresswoman's words. "I've worked defense policy for 15 years, Moss continued. "I've observed military operations at every level. What I witnessed here represents exactly the kind of leadership our armed forces need. Command decisions based on sound judgment rather than political calculation, authorization of necessary risk rather than excessive caution, and responsibility accepted rather than deflected." She paused, letting those words settle. "Colonel Thorne exemplifies the best of military leadership, and I'm honored to have my life owed to her judgment." After the ceremony concluded, Thorne found Lieutenant Colonel Garrett waiting near the headquarters building. His bearing reflected the professional respect that had replaced earlier skepticism completely. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that my team requested something specific," he said. "We'd like permission to include your command philosophy in our operational training. The way you balance oversight with operational flexibility, the way you demand thorough planning while supporting tactical decision-making. That approach makes us more effective." "Granted," Thorne replied. What specifically do you want to incorporate? Your requirement for realistic risk assessment instead of optimistic projection, Garrett explained. Your insistence on contingency planning for complications. Your authorization of tactical flexibility within strategic parameters. He paused, his expression reflecting genuine appreciation. My team operates better under your command because you make us think more carefully about our planning while supporting us completely during execution. That's the balance every commander should strike, she said. Oversight that enhances rather than constrains operational effectiveness. Most commanders don't achieve it, Garrett replied. You did, and my team recognizes the difference. The weeks that followed brought continued evidence of the base's transformation. Personnel performed their duties with confidence that came from competent leadership and clear expectations. Unit commanders approached complex situations with sound judgment rather than excessive caution. The installation operated with the professional excellence that distinguished weld organizations from merely functional ones. General Whitmore visited regularly, his presence reflecting recognition that Thorne's command represented something worth observing and studying. He brought senior officers from other installations to witness her operational approach, using the base as an example of effective leadership in practice. During one such visit, Whitmore met privately with Thorne in her office. Colonel, I'm forwarding your name for brigade command consideration. Your performance here has demonstrated capabilities that merit increased responsibility and authority. Sir, I'm focused on this command, Thorne replied. I understand, Whitmore said, but the military needs officers who can command effectively at every level. You've proven yourself here. The next step is demonstrating the same capabilities in more complex environments with larger organizations. The gate guards who had questioned her arrival 6 weeks earlier now rendered honors with visible pride when she passed their checkpoint. The transformation in their bearing reflected recognition that their initial skepticism had been replaced by respect earned through demonstrated competence. One of the original guards, Corporal Hayes, approached her vehicle one morning with a request. Ma'am, if you have a moment, he said, his professional courtesy now genuine rather than uncertain. I wanted to apologize again for how we handled your arrival. We made assumptions based on inadequate assessment. Corporal, we addressed that situation weeks ago, Thorne replied. What matters is how you've performed since then. Thank you, ma'am, he said. I just wanted you to know that everyone at this gate considers it an honor to serve under your command. You've shown us what professional leadership looks like. Command Sergeant Major Blackwood provided the most comprehensive assessment during a routine coordination meeting. Ma'am, I've served under 8 base commanders during my career. Your leadership approach ranks among the best I've experienced. You make sound decisions, you support your personnel, and you maintain standards without being unnecessarily rigid. Thank you, Sergeant Major, Thorne replied. This base's success reflects professional personnel at every level, not just command decisions. With respect, ma'am, professional personnel need competent leadership to achieve their potential, Blackwood said. You've provided that consistently since your arrival. The base continued operating with excellence that reflected organizational culture established through consistent leadership. Personnel understood expectations, executed their duties professionally, and approached challenges with confidence that came from knowing their commander would support sound judgment and accept responsibility for outcomes. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or if you've witnessed someone prove doubters wrong through demonstrated capability. Share if you've experienced situations where assumptions were challenged by undeniable competence. Thorne stood in her office as afternoon light streamed through windows overlooking the installation she commanded. 6 weeks had transformed skepticism into respect, resistance into collaboration, and doubt into confidence. The journey from questioned arrival to established authority had required patience, professional competence, and consistent demonstration of sound judgment under pressure. The base operated as a unified organization now, every element contributing to mission success with a professional excellence that distinguished exceptional commands. Personnel served with pride, officers led with confidence, and the installation represented what military organizations could achieve when leadership met the standards it demanded from others. The transformation was complete not because everyone agreed with every decision, but because everyone recognized that decisions were made based on sound judgment, that oversight enhanced rather than constrained operational effectiveness, and that their commander accepted responsibility for outcomes regardless of consequence. Thorne had proven her qualifications not through credentials or background, but through consistent demonstration of competence under conditions that revealed either capability or weakness. The base's success validated her command approach completely, silencing doubt through undeniable operational excellence and professional leadership that earned respect through action rather than demanding it through authority. The story that had begun with skepticism at the gate had concluded with recognition throughout the region. Her command had become a reference point for effective leadership. Her decisions were studied as examples of sound judgment under pressure, and her approach was incorporated into training as a model worth emulating. She had arrived as a questioned authority. She remained as an established commander whose capabilities were beyond dispute, whose judgment was trusted completely, and whose leadership had transformed an installation through professional excellence demonstrated consistently across every challenge encountered. The doubters had been proven wrong not through argument or assertion, but through operational success that spoke louder than any credentials. The respect she commanded was earned rather than assumed, validated through action rather than claimed through position, and established through undeniable competence that made previous skepticism irrelevant. This was command as it should be exercised, leadership as it should be demonstrated, and authority as it should be earned through consistent professional excellence that left no room for doubt.